Hi, welcome to Valley News Digest. I'm John Gregg, the news editor of the Valley News. We've been doing this program for about a year, so some of you viewers and readers, of course, know that we've been here in the Upper Valley since 1952. We're based in West Lebanon, and we cover Grafton County, Sullivan County, Windsor County and Orange County, and statewide issues in both states. We're also on the web, of course, at vnews.com. And we're joined today by our Lebanon area reporter, Tim Camarado, and also our sports editor, Greg Fennell, to talk about a couple of big things we've had in the paper recently. First, we're joined by Tim, who is here. Tim, welcome. Tim is here to talk about a pretty big issue that's got a lot of attention in the Upper Valley and the Hartford and Lebanon area, and that is you and Jordan Kademi and our photographer Jen Hauk on September 5th covered a Border Patrol checkpoint along Interstate 89 in Lebanon. What were they doing, and where exactly was it? How did it work?
Yeah, so this was on Interstate 89 going south, but after exit 19, before exit 18 in the exit 18 rest area. They set up right on the highway, and they were essentially stopping cars, asking the people inside whether they were U.S. citizens or not. Pretty much every car on the highway got stopped that day.
And this was all the traffic coming from Vermont or West Lebanon, basically, headed towards, into the other parts of the Upper Valley. People going to Dartmouth-Hitchcock might have been delayed. There were definitely traffic snarls and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, there were traffic snarls on the highway, and I heard sort of within the city itself as people tried to get around it.
Sure. And of course, even bigger than the fact that it stopped traffic is just the controversy about a Border Patrol checkpoint so far in the interior. You went through it yourself, right?
Yes, yeah, I went through it twice.
Twice. Good reporter. We sent him back to ask. What was it like? What happened when you rolled through?
It didn't take too long. So traffic was probably backed up right to the exit 19 area. It took about 15, 20 minutes at the most to get through. You roll down your windows, and a Border Patrol agent asks whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. If you say yes, he waves you through and you continue going. If you decline to answer, or I guess don't give an answer that's satisfactory to them, they were pulling people over.
Okay. And now it took, you were stuck that long. Of course, I don't think you went in right during rush hour, so it's possible that people might have had to wait longer too.
That's correct. I went in around 10 o'clock, but I know that they were still there around 5, as people were probably getting out of the hospital or out of work at Dartmouth.
Sure. Yeah. And why did they say they were doing it?
So they said that they were doing it to essentially look for people smuggling and for undocumented immigrants and undocumented aliens.
Okay, and there is a history to this here in the Upper Valley. We've seen the Border Patrol in Hartford and also on a Greyhound bus 2 years ago. They boarded one at the terminal in White River Junction. In Hartford, I think and I covered this back in the day, in the years after 9/11, they had a checkpoint that operated fairly regularly along I-91 near the rest area, southbound.
And they've been also operating summer checkpoints on 93 in the town of Woodstock, right outside the White Mountains, or in the Southern Whites.
Sure, Woodstock, New Hampshire. Although this one was pretty close to a border of sorts that's not the international border, but can you explain why? Are they really allowed to do this far inland?
Yeah, so U.S. law gives Border Patrol, the authority to make stops without a warrant within 100 miles of the aeronautical border. And we're pretty much close to about 95 miles from the Canadian border, 90 miles from Maine's coast. So we fall within that.
As the crow flies.
As the crow flies. And most of the U.S. population actually resides within that sort of border. So.
Most of the population, of course, because of so many people living in big cities.
Most people live on the
East Coast and the West Coast.
Cities, yeah.
Right, and I think there are actually 5 states that the 100-mile border encompasses the entire state. New Jersey, Delaware, and New Hampshire is one of those. Now, I know that Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont has always been a little bit rankled about this, because I've talked to him over the years. He's got legislation, and in the House, Congressman Peter Welch and Congresswoman Annie Kuster from New Hampshire are co-sponsors. They've got legislation to trim their sails a little bit on this, right? The Border
Yeah,
Patrol.
I believe
What would
it'd bring
they do?
it back to about 25 miles.
A 25-mile border, right?
Yes,
Border
that
check.
they'd be able to do these.
Yeah, and what sort of protests you encountered? People who certainly were not happy about this, right? What were they saying about the checkpoint?
I mean, they considered it, I mean, first there was this big inconvenience on people in Lebanon that they were concerned about, especially since there's so much traffic right now with construction in Lebanon. They were also concerned that this was a big waste of resources. At the end of the day, the Border Patrol checkpoint netted about 4 people. They made 4 arrests. 3 of them were undocumented immigrants. 1 person was out on an outstanding warrant. And they said that this was essentially a big waste of resources. The people that they were pulling over,
opponents of it.
the opponents of it. There's also this, concern that the people who they are pulling over, the people who they are questioning, are people of color, and so there's a lot of concern that this is sort of a racist practice.
Mm-hmm. That's what, and some civil liberties people also very much object to these sort of searches, right?
That's correct.
Is the ACLU involved?
So the ACLU put out a statement condemning this. Yeah, multiple civil rights groups are concerned about the fact that people are getting pulled over and questioned sort of just on their normal commutes and on roads inside the country.
Sure. Now, the Border Patrol told us, as you've said, they arrested 4 people at the actual checkpoint who they said were undocumented immigrants, or the legal term they use that they call illegal aliens. What about, they weren't just active that day, they were active the day before, making an arrest along the Miracle Mile, and Jen Hauk, our photographer, actually was there for the tail end of that. I think they arrested, 3 people there?
Yeah, so they arrested what appeared to be 3 people there. In the previous 2 days, and including sort of the day of the Border Patrol checkpoint, federal agents were in the Lebanon area arresting people, and together they said that they arrested about 25 people.
25 people with questions about whether they had the proper papers either to have entered the country or maybe have overstayed some sort of visa, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Now, this has also, of course, been the issue of protecting undocumented people who are living here amongst us, working on farms, other places, has been a very big issue in Hartford as well. There's going to be a town meeting vote in March about sort of to what extent can police communicate with federal immigration authorities about that. Hartford police say they do not, when they make routine stops, that sort of thing, they do not inquire of people's immigration status. This border checkpoint took place in Lebanon. What did Police Chief Rich Mello in Lebanon say? What's their policy?
So their policy is pretty similar. They don't inquire whether a person, about a person's immigration status when they're making the stops, and they don't look into it unless it actually has to do with the case that they're looking up or with some sort of New Hampshire law that they believe somebody has broken. And so essentially their standpoint is, unless it has to do with what we're talking about with the specific case that we're looking into, we're not going to ask about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Tim. We will let you readers and viewers know if and when the Border Patrol is back with more checkpoints, because it's a very interesting issue that brings a lot of different things together and is of a big concern to a lot of people. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back with Greg Fennell, our sports editor. Welcome back to Valley News Digest. We're joined now by Greg Fennell, our sports editor. Greg, welcome. Greg is responsible for having put together our annual fall high school sports preview, which we do every year and entails a fair amount of work, but it also helps you as readers sort of get prepared to watch a lot of fun sports action this fall. Football, of course, is a big sport, a lot of interest, and it looks like the Woodstock Wasps may have some challenges this year after what was a undefeated championship last year, right?
Yeah, they had a phenomenal year last year. It was kind of a harmonic convergence. They had a senior-laden roster, relatively deep roster for them, deep being about 30 athletes for that division of football, while everybody else in their division was relatively weak. So the predictable happened. They pretty much steamrolled everybody. First 9 games they played, including a state semifinal, they won every single one of them by at least 3 touchdowns. And even in the state final, they had a 4-touchdown lead until Poultney rallied in the fourth quarter to make it a little bit more interesting. So Woodstock did what it was expected to do last year. Unfortunately, the backside of that is you graduate a dozen kids from all over the field, and your numbers aren't quite what they were. It's going to be a lot more of a physical challenge. We've seen from the first couple of games they've been overmatched with their first 2 foes, and it's going to take time for them to develop. But the nice thing about Vermont Division III football this year is that with only 8 schools in it, all 8 make the state playoffs. So basically the regular season is a laboratory. You've got 8 weeks to figure yourselves out to get better, because the games don't mean anything aside from maybe playoff position in that first round of the playoffs.
Sure. So they're adjusting with a lot of new players
Yes.
who are having to start.
Yeah,
clearly.
absolutely.
Right. Yep. What about Hartford, Hanover, and Lebanon? They all had winning seasons last year. How's it looking for them?
I think Hanover and Hartford kind of work into this narrative. I think in the end, when the season's all done, the question that's going to be raised most is numbers among a lot of our programs. Woodstock's already seeing that. Oxbow's had that issue.
Numbers of players.
Numbers of players, yeah. I mean, you want to have an ideal number to be able to go out week in and week out and know that your kids are going to be healthy when it's all done. And when that number starts to dwindle down closer to 20, as is the case at Woodstock, Hanover, Oxbow, you start to get worried a little bit as the season goes on, because football being what it is, it's a sport of attrition. So we're going to be concerned about seeing how those numbers revolve in those various programs. Hartford's trying to see that a little bit. For years, they've wanted to be a Division I school, top level of Vermont football, but the numbers are starting to dwindle to the point where they're maybe not as competitive as we're used to seeing. So it's going to take time to figure it out. Lebanon's going to be the exciting one this year. Numbers are good there. They got a lot of skill position talent back. First game was a 49-6 win over Newport, a very young team.
Yep.
But Coach Chris Childs is playing a little bit more of a passing game than what we're used to seeing. So that first week, very impressive. Now once they start playing teams in the southern half of the state that have the bigger rosters, we'll see how good Lebanon really is.
Sure. And I think you struck on something that's actually more of an issue in Vermont probably than in New Hampshire. Vermont has lost a lot of its school population over the last 20 years, and clearly that's having an effect on some sports teams, which we've written about in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and particularly in sports in which physical contact is an important part. Football being one, numbers seem to be going down, hockey being another one. And Vermont has come through with some interesting ideas on how to work around that, mostly the member-to-member program that allows kids, say, at Thetford Academy who want to play hockey but don't have a program to see if there's an opportunity at Hartford, for instance. Sure. We have a few schools that do that, but not a lot.
Yep. There's a lot of interest in girls soccer, too, around the Upper Valley. Hanover and Thetford had championship years last year. What should we look with those programs?
I think Thetford is in position to seriously go for a third straight state title. They only lost 3 or 4 kids to graduation last year. They have strength all over the field from goaltending on out. They still have a lot of scoring talent. One of their top kids, I think it's Casey McVeigh, came back and is among the top scorers on their roster, and they've already started off well. And they've also gone off against some pretty good competition. They opened up their season against South Burlington, a school that's 2 divisions bigger than they are.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's a pretty impressive way to start the year.
And they defeated them?
No, actually, South Burlington won that game. The nice thing was that South Burlington came down here to play it.
Yeah.
2-0 decision, but it was a well-played game on Thetford's part.
Yeah.
Then they started playing schools their own size, like Rivendell, came up with a real nice win against an improving Rivendell team this past week. So I'm confident that Thetford's going to be one of the best teams in Vermont Division III again this year. I'm confident that Hanover is going to be very good also, because Coach Doug Kennedy's teams have always been so defensively focused. They always concern themselves about how they play in their half of the field first, worry about the offense second. I mean, even when they won the state championship last year, they did it on a penalty kick tiebreaker. All you got to do is play 80 minutes of soccer, another 20 of overtime. If you're still tied, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Hanover's good enough, I think, especially because of the youth program being so strong in Hanover, that they will be competitive in Division II. I think they need to pick up their offense a little bit, but defensively they're going to still be strong.
Okay. And now on the boys' side, boys soccer, there is a familiar face back coaching at Lebanon.
Yep.
What's happening there?
It's great to have Rob Johnstone back for a number of reasons. One, Rob used to be a journalist like us. Well, we are journalists, not used to be, but he knows what we need. And from an information gaining standpoint, gathering standpoint, he's great to work with. But he's also an excellent soccer coach. He was an All-American at Middlebury College some 25 some odd years back, has been a fine coach for all that time. Decided to take a step back after, let's see, where were we, 19, so for the 18 season, took that year off. Things didn't go very well with the replacement coach, so the school came back to him and said, hey, would you still be interested in coming back? And he said yes. So I expect to see Lebanon to be very competitive, again, very defensively focused, because that's what Rob coaches best, is how to play good, solid defense. But they've also shown some ability to score. Tyler St. Martin's had a real good start to the season for the Raiders offensively. I don't know if they're necessarily state championship caliber, but they're certainly good enough to be competitive in any match they play.
Yeah, great. Now, this supplement has it all. It also covers field hockey, cross country, golf, volleyball, even bass fishing. Who knew? But hey, this is the Twin States, New Hampshire, Vermont. Tell us about bass fishing. It's a high school sport.
It is a sanctioned sport in New Hampshire. It is called an exhibition sport in Vermont. And in basically both cases, what New Hampshire Interscholastic Athletic Association and Vermont Principals Association has done is try to find ways to draw more kids out to athletic activities who may not necessarily want to play a ball sport. And bass fishing has been one of the first to really catch on. Ultimate Frisbee in Vermont's been the other one. And so far, about 6 years or so, New Hampshire's actually called it a varsity sport. They break it down into smallmouth and largemouth bass competitions. The state itself hosts a state qualifier tournament in mid-September. State championship is at the end of September. I think it's going to be in Spofford, down by the Keene area. And then Vermont does the same thing, but up on Lake Champlain off of an access area in North Hero. And Lebanon's got a team. Let's see, Hartford, I believe, has a team. We have, I think, 3 or 4 in the area. And when it came time to do the supplement this year, it just seemed fair to at least put a directory out there and say, okay, these are the schools that have teams, here are the coaches, here's what the schedule is, and let's see where it goes from there.
Yeah, great. Well, this supplement also has the schedules for all the games as well, and it is going to be available online, or is available online, so people can find it at vnews.com and then click on the sports tab, and you'll find your way there. One last thing, Greg, while I have you, we talked about football. How about, just tell us a little bit, what do we know about Dartmouth football? They had a very good season last year,
yeah,
right?
They basically came down, as we expected. We were talking about this basically a year ago now in this same spot, that the season was going to come down to the Princeton game in Week 8. That's exactly what happened. Dartmouth had a lead in the fourth quarter, ultimately lost 14-9. Princeton goes on, wins the undefeated championship. I think there's still big expectations for Dartmouth this season. I don't recall if they finished second or third in the preseason poll, but considering that I think they were 7th last year, that goes to show you how accurate the polls can be. Obviously, as in all football seasons, they've got areas of concern. I think the line needs a little bit more depth, but they're still going to have the 2-quarterback system between Jared Garbino, the running quarterback, Derek Kyler, the throwing quarterback. They have the best defensive back in the country in Isaiah Swan, who could set school records for interceptions before the year is done. A lot of good talent in the receiving core, running back core. This is going to be a very competitive football team, playing some interesting games. I mean, they open up down in Florida again in Jacksonville this time. They'll play Princeton at Yankee Stadium this year. They'll have a couple of Monday, or I should say Friday night games at Memorial Field. So it's going to be a fun year, I think, again for Dartmouth football.
Sure. And just one last thing. So a former coach there has wound up in the pro rank, Callie Brownson. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think it was the last 2 years or so, Buddy Tevens, a longtime Dartmouth coach, has looked to kind of open up opportunities for women in coaching as well, and has had a couple, I think, as volunteer assistants, or they may have been paid assistants as well. In Callie's case, she's somebody who had some experience working with Dartmouth football, showing what she could do as a coach and both as an organizer as well. Buffalo Bills apparently showed enough interest in hiring her. So the thing that's nice about Buddy is that he's not a guy who just stays inside the box that's expected of a football coach. He's brought in women to give them opportunities to get experience. Of course, they've got the mobile tackling dummy to try to eliminate the amount of physical contact there is in practice and hopefully reduce injuries, reduce concussions. it's nice to see a football coach out there who's willing to do something different rather than the same old, same old.
Sure. I think I saw something that, said, hey, look, they went, was it 9-1 last year?
Yeah,
I think?
9-1 last
They
year.
went 9-1 and basically had practices where they didn't have contact. And so, with the concern about concussions, people are saying maybe some, and other programs probably are looking at that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think they are too. I mean, it's very important that football players at the youth level be taught to properly tackle. If you sit there and you watch NFL games every weekend, you think the only thing you're supposed to do is run headlong into physical contact, and that's where the injuries come about. Teach how to properly tackle. You know those skills by the time you get to college. Physical contact in college practices, it would strike me as being a lot less necessary.
Okay, great. Well, Greg, thank you for joining us. And viewers and readers, thank you for watching, and thank you for reading us every day. We'll see you again at newsstands and on your front door when we deliver the paper. And also hope to see you next month here on CATV.